Of course, the alternative to a partnership is a company. And the thing about a company is that you get separation of risk and asset. Okay? In the company is the risk. You can petition the risk into that separate trading vehicle. Now, if you have a problem in a company, the first thing to note is it's the company that's being liquidated, not you. If you have an asset protection issue, you become a bankrupt. And that's very different to liquidating a company. Okay? While it's still not good to liquidate companies and the stigma of it, and your creditworthiness can be questioned in certain circumstances, it's nowhere near as detrimental to you as personal bankruptcy. So that's a huge advantage because you've got the option of liquidating the company if you've got a problem. Now I want you to think about the parties to a company. We've got the shareholder and the director. Because as I said, we need to work out how the risk attaches to the asset. Now, of course, the assets are held by you personally, and the risk is going to be in your companies to separate it out. So if somebody sues this company with Joe Smith, I want you to have a think what the liability of a shareholder is. Okay? Many of you are shareholders in companies, and many of you will own stocks in publicly listed companies. And it's the same Companies Act that governs both. What is the liability of a shareholder? And of course, it's limited to your share capital. If you've got $101 shares, you've got $100 worth of liability. If you've got $1 million $1 shares and you haven't paid up the share capital, then you've got $1 million worth of liability that can emerge on liquidation. The liquidator will call for that money to come in. So I guess a couple of points there. Firstly, it's okay to be a shareholder in a company because you can limit your liability, and that means it's all right to put your shares into a trust. So if people say, oh, you can't put the shares of your company into your family trust, that's rubbish. Okay, you can put your shares of your companies into trusts, and the liability of the trustees is limited to the share capital. Just make very sure that you have small share capitals. You don't want massive share capitals. Okay, that's the shareholder, but the director is a different matter. And the thing about companies is that if you've been robbing Peter to pay Paul, okay, if the company's been trading insolvently, then under the Companies Act, if you're robbing Peter to pay Paul, Peter can sue the directors. Because it's illegal under the Companies Act to trade while insolvent. And there's lots of other bits of statutory, relief for creditors and people that are harmed by companies. Now, examples of Fair Trading Act. It reaches straight through the company and takes the assets of the director if the company becomes liable under any wrong in the Fair Trading Act. For example, if the company's conducts itself in a false or misleading manner, then the directors become liable to the parties that have been wronged by the company. And I guess what I'm driving at is I'm saying the assets of the house, the investments and the vehicles that belong to the director can still be dragged into the company and given to the creditors. So while it's a good thing to set a company up and separate the risk out into that separate company, you've still got to recognise that the director's not completely off the hook and their assets can be taken. Now, a couple of things about directors. The first one is directorship equals liability. This is not an ego trip for people. Okay? It's not a good thing to be a director. And I know that your spouse might be at home and they might be feeling a bit alienated from the world because it's a tough job working at home with the kids. But it's not a nice thing to say to your spouse. It might feel good to say, hey, look, you're not feeling very involved. You be a director in the company and feel part of it. But the counterpoint to that is, legally, what you're actually saying is, hey, why don't you be liable too? Let's double the family's liability. Is that smart? No. So don't make your spouses directors. Okay, point number one. If you do have your spouse as a director in your companies at the moment, consider resigning them as a director, the spouse that's not actively involved in the business. Now, I'm not talking about LAQCs owning rental properties, because those companies are going to get your spouse's guarantee for income guarantees anyway. In certain circumstances, the spouse's guarantee won't be required. For example, if your spouse is not earning, which is the case in my household, So, of course, I don't make my wife a director in any of my companies because the banks don't require her guarantee because she's not earning income. But if I made her a director, they'd not only want the shareholders' guarantee, the company's guarantee, they'd want the director's guarantee being myself and my wife. So I don't make her a director in the company. I'm just going to increase the liability of my household by doing that. Watch the deemed directorship rules, okay? If your spouse behaves like a director, binds the company to contracts, holds signing authority in the bank accounts, or rides around the town saying, yeah, I run this company, it's mine, and acquiesces to be a director, then they can be deemed to be a director by a court. And the third point here is that if you get divorced, you'll probably want the right of a director. You'll want the ability to step into the shoes of the director, or your spouse who is the director could trample some of your rights. Okay, now relationship property lawyers will always bring this up, and they're dead right to do so. But what I would suggest to you is that you want the right to be a director, not the obligation of being a director. And you can have your cake and eat it. So what you do is the spouse that's not going to be the director, in the shareholders agreement, you give them the right to appoint themselves director. Then they've got the opportunity to do so if they need to, if they get divorced. But while everything's going well, they can avoid the obligation of being a director. Make sense? Now, I said before that the director's assets can be taken and dragged into the balance sheet of the company. So the logical thing to do, of course, is to take the director's assets and protect them inside a trust. Okay? Whether you're being sued personally, or whether you're being sued as a director of a company, if you own the assets, they're going to be taken. So hence this saying that I've made up that I think is a good one. If you don't own it, they can't take it. Very simple strategy, and it works.